most of the time, I started my Christian life in a Baptist church. I got confirmed in a CNI church. My mom is from Matoma. My dad is from Church of South India. My grandmother is from the Orthodox Church of Yakoba. So I've got a flavor of all the various churches. So I'm quite ingrained into institutions. But I did become a Christian when I was, I think, 18 or 19. Until then, I had a position of agnosticism. So, but yeah, God has been good. Today I'm married, and I'm going to be talking something about relationships, right? And for the longest time, I was just wondering, I'm not even qualified to talk about it's complicated. So I'm just going to stick to my simple story, and I'm going to try and bring certain illustrations through that, and hopefully it'll make some sense to you.
Until he met the one girl he couldn't resist.
Valentín,
¿Sí?
es tu hija.
¿Qué?
¿Tienes $10? Voy a pagar el taxi. Hold on.
Tu mamá no sería capaz de dejarte aquí, ¿no? ¿O sí?
¿Y ahora?
¿Me escribí una carta?
Te mando un beso desde LA.
¿Qué quiere decir Elia?
Pues, alberca, ¿no? ¿Qué voy a hacer yo con una chamaca? Popo, ¿de qué voy a vivir? ¡Sorpresa! En una de esas te me voy a tener que poner a trabajar.
¿Te da miedo?
¿Cómo crees? Me estoy concentrando.
Ready.
Dile que sí.
He's ready.
Enjoy yourself, man.
Dice que te diviertas. Que no pongas cara de miedo, Pablo. Vamos a tener que soltar eso.
Mira, Maggie, carta de mamá.
Querida Maggie, te escribo a bordo del submarino nuclear Pancho Villa II.
Maggie tiene problemas por vivir en un mundo de fantasía.
My mom bought it for me from the moon.
¿Qué pasó realmente con la mamá de Maggie?
Se fue a pagar el taxi.
Mis amigos dicen que mi mamá es como Santa Claus, porque nunca la he visto.
Necesito que me ayudes. Maggie tiene que conocer a su mamá. Número 13, por favor.
Your name, please. George.
Next.
¿Jugamos?
Sale.
Soy la mamá de Mai.
¡Ya viene mi mamá! ¡Ya viene mi mamá! He's the bravest guy on earth.
¿Por qué me la quieres quitar?
Porque es mi hija.
Quiero vivir contigo toda la vida.
¿Cuándo bajas a checarme la coladera?
Después.
A esa señora se le tapa muy seguido la coladera, ¿verdad?
Instructions not included. It's a Mexican film. If you are interested in seeing offbeat movies, this is one of those that you should have a look at it. And this was kind of a saving grace because I just didn't know how to start this entire talk. And I happened to see this movie, and it was quite a bit of an emotional ride. It's been about 10 months since I've had a baby girl, and that itself has brought in new emotions I never thought existed within me, but it's been interesting. Even as I begin, I would like to thank all the leaders of the church for having me here, and I would like to thank you, and I'll thank for your patience even as we go into the next few minutes. And I hope that this is less of a sermon and more of, it's more like an opinion that I have about certain things about it's being complicated, which I really hope that by the end of it, it will at least stir some form of reflection or some form of conclusion, and maybe you can think about it and beat me up if you disagree with anything or if I say anything which is politically incorrect as I go through this. What we just saw was the story of Valentine, right? Great life he had. It's a place called Acapulco in Mexico. So I've got a little map there because I didn't know where Acapulco was. And when you see the pictures, it's really great. It's a beautiful place, a place that I would love to be if I was 18, 19, his age. Had all the women, no complaints there. And I think most of us, at least at that age, more important than career or anything else, I think that kind of drove most of us. Yeah, and he suddenly one day one lady comes up, gives him a baby, and the connection's gone again. Gives him a baby, and he's suddenly wondering what to do with it, right? And then he decides to take a trip to Los Angeles, and there's this entire drama that kind of unfolds of how he goes to LA. He finds himself a place to stay. He gets himself a job. 6 years he spends looking after this little child, and they fall in love with each other. There's a bonding that happens between the father and the daughter, until one fine day the mother comes back. Right? The mother comes back, spends a couple of hours with the daughter, and guess what? She is now ready to take her back. And that kind of leads into a battle of the court and the legal implications that come into it. And to make it a little more interesting, the mother has a woman as a partner. Right? And that has its own little drama that kind of unfolds. Eventually, Valentine wins the daughter. Yippee. But you know what? He suddenly realizes that it is not his daughter. And that kind of allows the mother to take the daughter back. And then again, there's a little bit of drama, there's a little bit of crying, there's a little bit of all of that happens. And then eventually, the father and the daughter decides that, hey, look, they can't live without each other. And they run back to Mexico. And just when you think that the movie's going to end with that, we just realize that the daughter has a heart problem, and she passes away, right? And so, you know, he kind of, that's how the movie kind of ends. And that's where, you know, life normally is very simple, but we tend to make it complicated, and that was said by Confucius, not me. In the whole process of that movie, you know, we have Julie, who is Valentine's potential mother of this child called Maggie, and the partner's name is Rennie. And in the whole thing, there are different aspects of these relationships that kind of unfold, where we realize that, or at least I realize in form of my own reflection, that it was so unnecessary, right? I mean, what started off with a lot of fun, what started off, you know, being at a place of just looking at their own instincts, led to so many unnecessary ripples that caused potential breakages in relationships. So then the question is, you know, it's sometimes inevitable that these complications take place in our lives. Why? Because it's the environment in which we grow. You know, we in India, there are different cultural notions, right? And it's inevitable that we move with age, we move with time, we move with the changing surroundings and circumstances, right? So at one point of time, very simple example, I learned how to drive a car in a side gear shift. That's over there, the Fiat Padmini. But today we are talking about automatic, automatic transmissions, right? So it's like an inevitable process that with changing technologies, with changing the environment, you know, we do look at different things that kind of causes us in our thought patterns, that brings us changes in our own thought patterns, and the way we make decisions are influenced by the things that is around us. What are the things that is around us, right? One is the different cultures that have now started to kind of come through in which we are all growing up, the environments that we live in. We have different kinds of ethnical diversities. Yeah, so if you can just, you know, we've become more sophisticated, right? We've come to a point where about 10 years ago, I would just get up, brush my teeth, probably have a cup of coffee. But today, the first thing that I do is actually look at my mobile phone, right? The first thing that I do, I don't even say good morning to my wife. I look at my mobile phone, I see is what's there on my calendar, if there are any important emails that I need to be focused on, and then I decide whether I need to get up, then I decide if I should brush or should I have my coffee first, and then I decide how my day is going to pan out, right? So it's evolving, it's changing. We're getting more sophisticated. there are different cultural influences that kind of sets us into the way we think and we make our decisions, right? We talk about property, or be it the kind of phones that we are going to buy. 10 years back, I didn't have a phone. But today, kids have phones, and I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and it's debatable. But the way the culture changes and the environment in which we live influences the way we think, the decisions that we take, and the way complexities slowly start kind of coming in. Ethnical diversity, right? The two states. In Hiranandani, the place where I stay in Powai, if I just walk down, I'll find a lot of expats over there, right? So there is, different ethnic groups have started to come into this country, setting up homes, talking to people. We see people marrying not just within two different states where, look at me, for example. Ethnically, I'm from Kerala. Today I'm staying in Mumbai, right? I studied in Calcutta. I'm all over the place, right? So if somebody asked me, where are you really from, I probably wouldn't be able to answer that because I just got too many emotions attached to too many cities. Yeah. And of course, changing technologies, right? We've moved from, having an address book to Facebook. We've moved from having Post-its to Twitter. We've moved from, Skype, which is great. And I'm not against any of these things. But all I think I'm trying to communicate here is that all of this has kind of led us to other issues, right? Which led us to a place where we've come together. The world has become a smaller place. And this has kind of led us to more exposure where we have started to express. What are we expressing? We're expressing, different notions. Politics. I was never interested in politics. But, with different people talking about politics, it just finds, today we prayed about, the state assembly changing and things like that. I find there's a need to understand things like that. Ideologies, why is ISIS around there? Or what is the entire thing about the Ukraine? People have started to have opinions around that. Careers have started to change, right? My dad comes from a position where he was in an organization for 35 years. But today, when I see the young kids and at my workplace, I sometimes get CVs which is less than 6 months, and they're ready to move on, right? Spirituality has started to change. The people have started to get more cognizant of the other kind of religions and that is around. I, for example, I didn't believe in Christ for the longest time. I found it very difficult to believe that there is just one way, right, to God and to understand the things that I didn't understand. And of course, sexuality, right? I mean, today there is so much of talk about who we want to be with, the different kinds of interactions. And all of this exposure has nothing but just has allowed us to be more expressive, right, rather than self-control. We are in a world where, selfies have become so prominent, right? Everywhere you go and see, it's selfies. And I believe that when you take a selfie, you're not supposed to have a nice, you're supposed to do something funky. You're supposed to make a face or stick out your tongue. It's just expressing yourself. So we've moved into a generation where self-expression has become more prevalent or more in the limelight rather than self-control, right? And all of these different conversations and on all of this shifting ideologies and culture and all of that, it's just allowed us to have more choices, right? It's not that we never had choices in the past. It's just that we are now open and exposed to express the way we make our choices and kind of define sometimes by ourselves what those boundaries really are. So essentially what then happens is that we become much more bolder, right, to make these expressions, right? We started to express ourselves in sometimes just defiling the institutions that our parents would probably try and bring us up in, right, especially when it comes to these relationships. Today I've got soda glasses, I look a little more serious and things like that, but I was a crazy child for my mom to kind of manage and handle. Why? Because I always tried to push the boundaries that they would try and draw, it never worked, right? It just made me more rebellious. It just tried to push. What I do see now is, that was at the age of 19, 20, but now I do see that even happening, the age seems to have come towards the 16s and the 17s, and now, now that I've got a daughter, it's going to be very interesting, and she's my daughter, and sometimes that really scares me, because if she turns out to be like me, oh dear Lord, we're going to have something in our hands.
Past you on my bike. That's alright, because I'm not sure who I like. Why did you give me an Indian bird? I told the principal because it really hurt. You're such a stupid jerk.
I can't tell her that I like her. I can only shoot her with the spitball. She should know that it means the same thing after all. I threw glue at her just to get a reaction. She was a distraction from addition and fractions. Drew a picture of her cause I thought she was neat. We've always been close cause we have assigned seats. I'll never forget when I passed her that note, cause she checked the box yes and that's all that she wrote. From then it was great and we had a play date. We played house and she made me a fake Play-Doh steak. The next day I saw something that I'll never forget. She was playing and laying with Kyle in the ball pit. I started to cry and lay down on the floor. I said, you're a fart face, I don't like you no more. I want you out of my heart, but you're stuck like a splinter. Goodbye, my mom's calling me for dinner.
You said mean things and you ran away. That's okay, it must have been a blessed day. You stole my heart and you stole my life. That's alright, because I love the way you like. Love the way you like.
Now I apologize for wiping boogers on your jacket and backpack. I wish that it didn't, I wish that I could backtrack to the day before they made me sit in the corner. This feels like a third grade restraining order. I knew that I loved you at first, but I fought it. My heart was a kickball, then you suddenly caught it. I'm sorry, but there's something I must confess. It was me who ripped off your Nintendo DS. I felt bad in return, and while you were busy napping, we're together again, it's just like it never happened. I dressed up as Weasley and you were Hermione. You said you had spells that could make me less whiny. You colored inside of the lines of my heart, cause you opened me up and then you cut a fart in my heart. I'm so bored with these games that we're playing, I guess that's why they call them board games.
Well, I am rubber and you are glue. Words bounce off of me and then stick onto you. Did you just call me a doo-doo pie? That's alright, I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I?
Now here's the thing, just like what we saw in the clip, we find it hard to ignore the deep longings of our heart of love, relationship, and intimacy. And that's okay, you know what? And there's nothing wrong in it. Why? Because we are made for meaningful connections. That's how God's wired us, right? We are made for meaningful connections. And the Bible is poetic about it. There are 3 things that are too amazing. For me, 4 that I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a snake on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a young woman. When the Cupid stings, and it's always an emotional ride, right? The little bit of flirting, you try and think of ways of trying to go and talk to that girl, what you want to say, how you're going to say it. You want to make sure that you look the best. You probably go and have a haircut, and today's fancy haircuts are something to reckon with. And once that entire drama kind of unfolds, the time that you spend together, it's like the purest thing that you probably would ever feel, right? The shared laughters, the memories that kind of build up as those emotions kind of start coming up. And that's where, we have this entire 4-letter word that, kind of defines all of this, love, right? How many of us in this room have actually felt this? Does it make sense? Okay, a couple of hands, okay. Okay. Oh, wow, most of you guys haven't felt this? Really? Wow, you know what? I used to get it almost 7 months. Every 7 months, this feeling would come. It was just, it was amazing. So what is love? Right? I use DuckDuckGo. I don't know, how many of you have heard of DuckDuckGo? Raise of hands, please. Now that technology is working, I'm okay, right? So I'm just going to ask you questions if you guys are not going to interact with me. What's DuckDuckGo? Have you heard of DuckDuckGo? Have you heard of Google? Oh, okay, great. So DuckDuckGo is another search engine that I've started to use. Apparently, it does not track a lot of things that Google otherwise tracks. So when I typed in define love, this is what I got: a deep, tender, feeling of affection, feeling of intense desire and attraction, sexual passion. How many of us watch Big Bang? Have you heard of the Big Bang Theory? Yes. Okay, great. So there is one of the most annoying characters, but he's very popular, is Sheldon. In the latest episode of Big Bang, Sheldon says he apparently gets himself a girlfriend who likes him a little more than he does. But he says to her that he loves her, right? And there's this entire pause that happens in the serial because nobody would expect him to say something like that. And he says, I cannot deny that I have feelings for you that can't be explained in any other way. I briefly considered having a brain parasite, but that was too far-fetched. So even Sheldon, who is very scientific in his approach to life, suddenly feels that there's something called love, right? And he tried to explain it by certain other alternative theories, but obviously that didn't work for him. And he says, yeah, I love you. And where does all of this reside, right? I mean, it's so popularized. Isn't this symbol very common, right? Even when I'm writing stuff, or when I was writing my notes here, the easiest thing for me to, instead of writing H-E-A-R-T, I would just write the symbol, right? And sometimes when I'm on the phone and I'm trying to concentrate on what the other person is saying and not fall asleep, I'm probably making sketches of hearts of different shapes and kinds of things, right? So the heart is where all these feelings reside. And it's so much popularized, right? Especially with Valentine's Day and things like that. And Valentine's Day is special to me. Why? Because I'm born on the 14th of February. So even if I want to try and forget my birthday, I'm reminded of my birthday. But I've also used that to my advantage. Once I happened to be with a girl out for coffee, and my dad walked into that coffee shop, and I said, hey, you know what? I'm just treating her to my birthday. And I had this extremely sheepish grin on my face. And in this heart is what Proverbs also says, is that above else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Eminem, how many of you have heard of Eminem? He's also called Marshall, right? Hip-hop culture. See, we're changing cultures, right? At one point of time, I thought listening to Bjork, if you haven't heard of Bjork, this is singer who had a very strange voice, and I thought it was really cool to listen to her. Today, Eminem and hip-hop culture has become quite prevalent within the music scene. And he says, you ever love somebody so much you barely breathe, the warm, fuzzy feelings and the chills that comes along with it, right? As I said, in my 18s and 19s, I was a bit crazy. I think I had a lot of things. The way I found myself, I had a big identity crisis, of course. We would do some really silly things, but of course, not in today's context, more in the 1990s, 1989 kind of way. One of the measurement that we had, and I'm not sure if it's still the same, but one of the measurements that we had of how popular we are was with the boy or the girl that we were with, right? Or the group that we were with. And we would do some really silly things to try and get into this. One of the things that we, and I make sure that I emphasize the word we, used to do was, to get some height, we would fold up some paper and put it on the soles of our shoes, right? And that would give us height, right? So now you're looking a little more taller than the girl, and obviously you might be looking a little more taller than the boy standing next to you. We would, of course, suddenly we would have this entire urge to go and pump our muscles up, right? So that we are looking nice and smart and physically more attractive to the opposite sex. We would also learn to play an instrument. And one of my best friends, his name is Peter, most of you might know him. He plays, I saw him playing the guitar, and I realized that, a lot of girls were interested in the guy. So I went and picked up how to play a guitar. Unfortunately, the only thing that stuck by me was Fluffy, which is my stuffed fish. All the others kind of very politely humored me as I played whatever little chords that I knew. We would wear accessories. As I said, I had an identity crisis, right? So what I did was we had a bracelet. So at one point of time, this was in class 10, class 11, everyone who was cool had bracelets. It was made out of silver and it had our names on that. And you know, we would flash it around and we thought we were extremely cool. And during conversations, I would sometimes even deny my roots. Why would anybody want to say that I'm a South Indian boy coming from Kerala, from the land of the Lungis, right? That doesn't sound really cool, right? So I would even deny my own roots just so that I could stick or, you know, sound a little more hip, so to speak. And that's when I met this girl, right? Well, I met a lot of girls, but this particular girl, you know, we started doing all the little fuzzy feelings came up, and I could barely breathe when I saw her. Wrote her a little note, literally did. Suddenly the poet in me, you know, the words that I found difficult to describe suddenly started to flow, and I was like, wow, this sounds really great. And at that point of time, we didn't have a printer, so I would give it to my dad to take a print. And my grandmom once asked me, who are you writing all these things to? And my dad said, Mum or Amma, as in Malayalam would mean mother, said, you know, don't worry about all these things, that's just George's thing. And my dad was blissfully ignorant of all these things, right? What he was trying to do. At least he tried to act that he did not know. And I thought he didn't know that I was trying to woo this girl. Yeah, and then, you know, I would find intelligent ways to try and save up money. Why? So that we can go out for the movies, we would try and buy her a cup of coffee, and I'm just a student, right? But you'd find these different ways to try and spend as much time with this girl. I also happen to be the president of the youth in St. Paul's Cathedral in Calcutta. Whenever we used to have a Bible study, there were 4 people who would land up, right? There was the priest, there was the secretary, bless his soul, he's now become a priest in Pune somewhere, and then there was me, and then there was this girl, right? Great stuff. Why? Because under the entire context of going to church, it was a great way to meet up with this girl. Right? These are just intelligent, and see, I don't say it with any form of pride, but all I'm trying to say here is that we find ways and means to try and spend as much time as we want or we would like to with a girl or with a boy that we like to meet. It was what? Love, right? And it came to a point one day when I was in Darjeeling, which is a little hill station up north of Calcutta. I was out with my friends, and I got to know that this girl is going to move out of Calcutta, and she is moving to Bombay. And I was down with a fever of a little, I think it was about 101, 102. And I decided that I have to go and see her before she leaves, and got onto a bus, traveled for 10 hours. Now, this is a state transport bus, right? And I can tell you that it was quite rickety in nature. It had no suspensions, as we are now kind of aware of, that is there in Volvos and things like that. It was quite rickety, and there was no seat because it was just about an hour before the bus left that I decided to go. So I had to sit on the engine of the bus. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but you know, the engine is just near the driver. So you would really sit on that, and by the time I got to Calcutta, I think it just roasted up my bums. But yeah, so you know, I would do all of that just so that I could go and see her. So I picked up the phone as soon as I landed at the bus station. I called her house up, and the brother picked up the phone and said, hey, oh, you know what, she's already left and she's not at home. But in the background, I could hear her. I could hear her say, oh, no, tell him this or tell him that. And I was thinking, what just happened there, right? In her perspective, she was moving on to greener pastures. Calcutta, Bombay, come on. Right, you know, Bombay is the financial city, more opportunities, blah, blah, blah. Calcutta is not as, you know, it's like probably the South India for a Mumbaiker. So she moved. And when I would try and find, excuses to go over my various, the storms and, fight the various institutions that defined when you can meet and when you cannot meet, suddenly we start finding ruses as to why we shouldn't meet, right? Suddenly we find ourselves, even with a little drizzle, we would say, oh, you know what, I cannot come and meet you. Why? Because I might catch sick, I might catch a cold, and I might not want to come and meet you. Or we now start finding excuses for not being with that other person, right? And we break up. And then what happens? It's the same song, by the way, and it just happens in the next paragraph. You get sick of looking at them, right? Now you're spewing venom at the person that you so thought you loved, right? You almost get into a wrestling match, right? Because now you're pushing and pulling, and you're what's that? You've lost that feeling that you so intensely and so passionately you had for that other person. So what happened to this love? Where did this love go? Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And the first verse that I read, that everything that we do comes from the heart. And if you actually bring these two verses together, there's a bit of an explosion, right? Because everything that I do comes from the heart. And the heart, according to Jeremiah, is deceitful, and it's beyond cure. I'm not sure if you can read it, but here are some of the stories that, when I Googled, I saw come up. It says it broke up and got back a lot, so we broke up and got back a lot. I quit my job because of him. My heart, he hurt my heart so bad. I thought I would be happy forever. And all of these stories had a sad ending to it. The truth is, and this is a quote from Tom Hanks, the truth is, I'll never know all there is to know about you, just as you will never know all there is to know about me. Humans are by nature too complicated to be understood fully, so we can choose either to approach our fellow human beings with suspicion or to approach them with an open mind, a dash of optimism, and a great deal of candor. It sounds great, and probably that's something that I tried to implement, but it just didn't work, right? How do you approach somebody that you had such great feelings for, and now you don't have those feelings? How do you open with a sense of optimism, right? It just didn't work, right? And that's where, for me, Christ started to play an important part. You see, the heart is deceitful. Before I knew it, now, going into the future of my own story, things changed, right? We moved away from Calcutta. My dad was transferred to Coimbatore, so I come down south. And that's when I saw Smita, who happens to be my wife. And she is somewhere here, maybe with my daughter. And I saw her one day go up the cobblestones of this little quaint church called All Souls in Coimbatore. And guess what? The fuzzy feelings started to come back. I wanted to know her name, wanted to see who she really is, And at that point of time is when I started to understand Christ. I started to go, and at that point of time I was in Calcutta. She was in Coimbatore. My parents had just moved to Coimbatore, so I had come down to visit them and help them shift. And that's when I saw her, started getting these feelings. I go back after my holiday in Calcutta, and I was thinking about her, just couldn't get her out of my head. And there was this convention that was happening called the Keswick Convention, and the pastor was talking about, about Isaac. And suddenly these words flash in my head, right? Are you willing to put Smita on the altar of sacrifice? Now, I'm not yet a Christian. Okay? I'm just trying to understand Christianity, or trying to understand Christ and all the things that surround Jesus. and of course, there are many other things that kind of led to me going to church and things like that, but I'm going to spare you those details. And at that point of time, you see that what was happening was I'm trying to get to know Christ, and here's this girl that I really like. And suddenly I've been asked this question, are you willing to put her on the altar of sacrifice? The first 6-7 months, your passions are running wild, right? Because all that you can think about is this girl, and at that point of time, I don't think I even knew her name. And I was trying to find out how the best way I could find out her name without actually making too much of a public display about it. So what did I do, right? There was a sense of, man, how do I deal with this, right? And you know what? In the previous times, what I would probably do is I'd probably jump into a train and then go all the way there just to go and find out her name. I mean, I've done that in the past, just before I got married, I was relatively spontaneous. Once you get married, you kind of get disciplined into a you kind of get domesticated in a good sense. And Smita probably did a lot of good things to me that way. But I was now wondering, what is it that I really should be doing to really understand this entire notion of love? Right? Jesus says, come follow me in Matthew 4:19. He doesn't say, come follow your heart. He says, come follow me. And that's when I came into that process of allowing him to lead me. And how difficult is it to actually just bend down and say, okay, I'll put Smita on the altar of sacrifice. I went back home that evening, I got onto my knees, and I just couldn't say it. Till about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was crying like a baby, till my cheeks hurt. I didn't realize I had muscles in my cheeks until that day. Right? I just was crying, and I just couldn't say I'm willing to put her on the altar of sacrifice. And yet he says, come follow me. And I got down on my knees, and I think that was my first prayer where I actually said, I don't really understand all of this, but I think you make sense to me, and I'm willing to put her on the altar of sacrifice, and you are going to be my priority number one. Right? Was it easy after that? Absolutely not. It required me to change my heart, like how the psalmist in Psalm 51 says, change my heart, O God, right? We need it. See, the feelings are there in the heart, right? But we need to give our heart to God, or at least attempt to give it to him so that he can lead it. Often what happens is we follow our hearts and we start getting led by it. And I think that's where the danger is. Right? We need to be stopped. The danger of continuing to be led by the heart is where the issues, I think, slowly but steadily starts creeping up. We need to learn to lead the heart and not the other way around. Right? And so therefore, when you come into the definition of what God thinks love is, it's Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. This is from 1 John 3:16, not John 3:16, but 1 John 3:16. He says, this is how we know what love is. So, my entire perspective from the warm, fuzzy feelings started to change into a perspective where I'm now looking at love as a place where I need to serve and probably lay down my life. Right? Just yesterday, while I was kind of clipping certain things and things like that, I pricked my finger and I kind of made a big fuss about it, and I saw blood coming out, and I realized I can't handle pain. So forget about dying on the cross. I don't think I'm ready for that. And at least in my path of maturity, I don't think I'm at a place where I would even die for my wife, even though I love her. Thankfully, God hasn't asked me to do that so far, and I hope it remains so. But what I mean, or what we can probably do from a very practical point of view, is just this, right? I love Formula One, right? It's these extremely fast cars where, milliseconds make a difference of who's going to win or lose. Today's a Brazilian Grand Prix, by the way, for those who are interested in Formula One. For Smita, She just thinks it's just cars going round and round and round and round, right? And probably they get a headache by the time they come out of it. Now, when I say I'm fanatical, I actually had a file where I would write down time to try and see what are the various strategies that these guys would use. And I would just not like anybody to come during that time. I still remember when the cars had come to London, there was a show that they had done in London. I actually became Darth Vader, right? I actually crawled on my knees and made sure I pushed everyone to come very close to the car. But as a natural self, I'm a nice little quiet little boy who would probably sit in the corner of the room. That's how much I loved the game. But then I realized, now that I'm with Smita, that in my life, I'll probably not even sit in a Formula One car, right? I probably won't even be a janitor in one of those garages, right? And that's when I said, hey, you know what? I need to learn to not get so obsessed with this game, right? Or whatever little that I like to watch of it, right? And so I started to make sure that I changed my priorities. So if it required me to spend that 1 hour writing her a letter or just calling her up, and normally these games are on a Sunday, and that's when she's also free, I started doing that. In the meantime, Smita started saying, hey, you know what? This guy likes the game, right? Let me try and understand what is it that he likes about it, right? And then slowly we actually formed an equilibrium, right? It did not require for me to lay down my life, but the principle that I'm trying to bring here is it was not about me anymore. It was about trying to spend that extra time with a person by sacrificing what was inconvenient to me, right? And I think that's where the perspectives started to change. And that's where, I started to realize that there's much more beyond than the feelings of fuzziness that we have. And in the same way, Smita as well, it's not that I was the only one who started to do things like this. Smita, she's a little more saner compared to both of us, right? She's a little more correct about things, but she's not a writer. I can write. Somehow, it's easier for me to write than to speak, because when you write, you can make your corrections, whereas when you're speaking, you can never, correct whatever you're saying. Once said, it's said. But you know what? She started to write me letters as well. And there are times when I've actually written 35 pages of words, which if I were to read today, I'll probably fall asleep. But she actually would, she actually had the forbearance of actually reading through it. And one day she wrote me a 2-page letter, and I was like, wow. She made that effort to do something which does not naturally come to her. And today, we have Kezia, right? So now, moving from the entire notion of love just being feelings, which are obviously influenced by the environments that we are living in, to a point where it's no more about, it's more about trying to see how we can serve the other person and trying to see how we can meet the needs of the other person. We come to a point where, it takes time for things to kind of fall together, right? And that's the last point that I kind of wanted to bring to your attention, that there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And I learn a lot from my daughter as far as this is concerned. So this has been 10 months since I've had her. But you know what? It took 9 months for the baby to grow inside the womb, which also prepared both Smita and I to bring her into the world, right? Today, she's starting to stand. And it's sometimes I would like to make her walk, but she's not ready for it. Even before she stood up, the doctor told us, don't force her to stand. You know why? Because maybe the body is not ready for the legs to take on the weight. Because if you force her to stand, she'll probably stand, but there's a good tendency for her to have bowed legs, right? So there's a time for all of these things to happen. And you know what? When Jacob looked at marrying Rebecca, it took him 14 years before he did that. And between Smita and I, well, I would not want to compare myself in that league, but it took us 7 years before we actually got married. And today we've known each other for about 14 odd years, right? It took time. And it's not that we could not have married earlier. Right? We were both financially independent at one point of time, of course. If we wanted, we could have just got married. But our parents were not yet ready. They were a little more hesitant. They just felt that, we need to give it a little more time. I could have been rebellious. I could have done exactly what I wanted to do, but I chose to wait. And so did Smita, right? And that really helped, because when we came together, we knew that it was the right thing to do. It was not led by feelings anymore. It was led by certain decisions that we took to love each other, right? And sometimes that's all it is. It's a decision. There are days when I suddenly wake up and I'm thinking, why did I marry this woman? And I'll tell you, it's a struggle sometimes, right? I travel a lot. And you think I don't I don't see other women? Of course I do. But you know what? When I took and married Smita, and I put this ring on my thing, we made a promise that we are going to be together. It's very easy to look at other women, but all of those are lies. Why? Because the truth is, she is my wife. And it's a decision that I make, saying, hey, you know what? She's attractive. And I might have warm, fuzzy feelings for her. But that is a lie. Because the truth is this. It's Smita. Right? So feelings can come, feelings can go sometimes, and that's why, sometimes we fall in and we fall out of love. Right? But when we go by what, Christ has to try and build into our hearts, notions change, perspectives change, and we don't want to rush things. We've got time. I won't say my age. I somehow have, like a lot of women, I also have a tendency of not wanting to speak my age. But yes, take a guess. But I've crossed my 30s, 30. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to deal with a lot of issues. I'm still learning how to, really love my wife for who she is, and it's a journey, and I still have a long time to do it. And even just my relationship with God, I sometimes keep him so occupied, right? Because if I was always a nice person, he would be a little unemployed. So in his own way, he's also teaching me, and our love, story is kind of getting built as the years pass by. And you know what? Even with Adam, right? Genesis 2:15 says, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And this was before he even met Eve. So for men especially, it's so important for us, before we rush into all of this, is take time to plow the land, prepare the land before you come and meet your Eve. Right? You can choose to do anything else, and that's absolutely fine. But to make life a little more simpler, it's just trying to follow, or at least for me, it's just trying to follow what God has instituted for me in terms of my purpose, in terms of in terms of just slowing things down a little bit, not rushing into things whenever you feel like it, not always being spontaneous. And you must be spontaneous. I'm not saying that, but what I think I'm trying to say here is that we don't want to rush into things without just based on feelings. You just want to try and suss it out a little bit. In Corinthians, it also says that in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. So you see, here was another recognition that there is no one who is bigger than the other person, right? I mean, this entire thing about different sexes and things like that. No, Smita is my helper, but she is somebody who comes alongside me, and we work things out. She is a different individual, and she thinks and has her own opinions, and she can be very opinionated at times, right? In the same way, I think, and I have my own ways of thinking, and I have my own opinions. Do we clash? Absolutely. Oh, you should see some of our fights. We fight like cats and dogs. But you know what? It's exciting, because after you finish fighting, trying to make up for that is great fun. It's great fun. And sometimes I can be very nasty with my words, right? Very, very nasty. And I think I made her cry once, and I felt so bad about that. And then it took me about 3 days to try and win her back. But you know, those 3 days, I mean, I wouldn't repeat it again, but those 3 days, it just kind of renewed my feelings for her. It renewed the decision that I had made for her. Right? And that's something that I just wanted to kind of bring all together and just say, life can be complicated. Life can be complicated, right? And we need to just get used to it. But the way we deal with complications is just understanding where we are. What is it that influences our thoughts? What is it that influences our heart? Right? As much as there is exposure all around, not everything around us is necessarily good for us, right? We should not be driven by our heart, but we need to learn to lead our heart. And we need to have a guiding post. And in my view, the best guiding post is Jesus Christ. It's just kind of helped me for all of these 30 odd years to make certain decisions. And by his grace, it's been good. It's not about ourselves anymore. It's about serving the other person. Because when you do that, you try, it becomes a little more simpler. Because it's easier to change yourself rather than change the other person, right? Because you can control your own behavior. It's very difficult to try and control the behavior of the other person. And finally, we just need to let time unlock. Patience is a good virtue, literally, to have. And whichever stage of relationships that you are in, whether you're looking at getting married, whether you're courting somebody, or whether you're already married, I think, just time is, just let it be. Don't try and rush things. Just let it be. And here's the thing. When I put Smita on the altar of sacrifice, I was convinced in my mind that she was going to go away from my life. Why? Because I felt that, God is going to be this guy who is going to kick me for all my sins and for being very, very nasty to him just before I became a Christian. So now that he is going to make all of these changes, I don't even have a degree in my hand. So obviously Smita is going to go away from my life, right? The next day I go back to the convention. I was cutty with God, or I was, sulking with him. And he gives me this verse from Amos 3:3, which says, it takes two to walk together, right? Smita, who happened to be in Chennai, gives me a call that evening and starts talking to me and says, hi, how are you? Fine. How was your day? Good. And I was thinking, why should I even waste my time? It's not even going to work out. Oh, by the way, George, you know what? I was in church today, and this is what I got. Amos 3:3. It takes two to walk together. And then, and ever since then, we've never turned back. It takes two to walk together, right? We have different views, we have different opinions, and that's okay, right? Because they need to come together, and it takes two to walk together. And every day we try, especially for me, I'm a boy, right? And I don't think I have grown up as much as I should. I still get distracted by a lot of things. But one of the prayers that I have when I have my own quiet times is, Lord, help me to make the right decisions. And one of the right decisions is to always learn to love my wife as you would want me to love her.